Welcome into the ArtGibbs Sports Business Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. And in this episode, we're joined by a very special guest, former owner of the Seattle Mariners, the founder and CEO, chairman of the board of Emmis Corporation, involved in radio, TV, and as I mentioned, the Seattle Mariners, Jeff Smulyan. And he's written a book, Never Ride a Roller Coaster Upside Down, The Ups, Downs, and Reinventions of an Entrepreneur. It's a fantastic read. I believe it officially comes out December 6th, but it is a page turner, all the stories throughout a long business career, and of course dives deep into radio, broadcasting, as well as sports team ownership, which is extremely fascinating to me, and I'm sure many of you all as well. So without further ado, here's the interview with Jeff Smulyan. Enjoy. All right, Jeff. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it. And what made you do a memoir at this time? Write this book. Why a book, and why now?
Well, the genesis of the book was I had driven my now 18-year-old daughter to school all the time from kindergarten until she fired me when she got her driver's license. And we would just talk about life. I'm one of those fathers who just talks about lessons I've learned and stories. And one day she said, "Dad, I love these stories. Nobody would ever believe half of them. You got to write them down." So when COVID came about, I just decided to write. Things were slower, and I wrote 300 pages in about 45 days.
Wow.
And just sent it to a couple of friends, and they both said, "Look, you have a book here." So next thing I knew, we, got an agent, we got a publisher, and it's been a very, very enjoyable process.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and I've started digging into it. It is quite a read. It's fast paced. And you kind of open with your love for radio at an early age.
Right.
What drew you to radio? What were some of the aspects that
a kid of my era who grew up with transistor radios under our pillow, listening to top 40 music and Major League Baseball games on the radio, and just did that and always loved it. Always knew I wanted to be in it, and always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and went to college at USC and law school there. And then my dad talked me into coming home and ran the first radio station, which is memorable because David Letterman was our midday guy. But always wanted to start my own company, and I did. And 40 some years later, here we are.
Yeah. And why not TV? It was kind of emerging at that time, and was there something unique to radio that
radio was more creative? You sort of had a radio station; it was a blank slate. You could be top 40, you could be hip hop. We started the whole notion of sports radio, which when we did it was revolutionary with WFAN in New York. So we really, were able to create all sorts of fun things. And with TV, you're sort of if you're a CBS affiliate, you turn up, open the switch, and you get CBS programming, or NBC or CBS. So I always thought it was more creative and always loved it. We did end up getting into TV. We owned 16 TV stations at one time. So we were in TV a lot.
Are there aspects of radio and kind of the podcasting scene over the last 10 years? Are there any similarities, differences, like, because it seems like kind of a same thing. You have kind of a creative blank slate, and, you can get really into a topic, or, whatever. It's not as tight.
Radio is sort of one to many. Podcasting is more of a one-to-one experience. So I think radio and television, over-the-air TV, are sort of more broadly based. But I think we're getting into a more one-to-one time where people want that one connection, which podcasting does. People do that with streaming to an extent. So I think the question has always been the economics of these businesses. Are they economically viable? But that's different than whether the consumer experience is as enjoyable.
Sure. And what's your take on the economic viability from your experience?
I think it's a tough putt. I've been streaming audio for a long time. We've seen the podcast business. There are some podcasts that have a massive audience and they can make some money. The Joe Rogan's come to mind, or The Daily with the New York Times. but in most instances, it's tough to get a gigantic audience. Yeah.
Yeah. So what led you into kind of the sports world? Did you always sort of dream of owning a team or being involved with a team, or was it, how did that come about?
Always loved it. Listen, every kid in my era was a baseball fan. And always loved it. When we bought the station in New York, which became WFAN, we had the Mets, and I got to know the Mets people, and we were sort of known as the people who turned around radio stations in New York and LA and Chicago and San Francisco and Washington. And people said, you guys are really good marketing guys. The Mariners really need some help in marketing. The team's for sale. And we looked at it. I'd always loved Seattle. So we had a lot of fun with it, for a while.
Did you, when you were going into that, did you value it based on your radio experience and purchasing stations, or was it totally different, or did you have advisors in that area, or what was that process like?
Yeah, we had a lot of advisors. We looked at the revenue, overall revenue, and we had always bought radio stations that were sort of bottom of the market, and then said, if we do this, and this, can we get it into at least the third quartile or the second quartile? And we've been successful at that. We knew the Mariners were by far the smallest revenue team in baseball, and we said, if we do this A, B, C, D, and E, we can make it more competitive and make the economics work.
So talk a little bit about that. When you got in there, what kind of stuff did you do? Was it all about the broadcasting or game day stuff, or everything?
It was everything. We really approached the game day experience. I'm very proud that the things we did then were kind of revolutionary. We had video clips, we had situational music. I can remember one thing we did, which we thought would get us in trouble. Louis Polonia played for the Yankees, and before he had played with the Brewers, and he'd had sort of an underage relationship with a young woman, and when he came out to bat, we played She Was Just 17, you know what I mean, and things like that. So we did a few things like that, but we also did singles contests at the ballpark and post-game concerts, and all sorts of funny movie clips. We played the John Belushi clip from Animal House when we were behind in the ninth inning, when was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor, things like that. We did all sorts of fun, and we really did. I was very proud of what we did with attendance, and TV ratings went up, but the economics of the game kept getting further away from Seattle. We never had a cable contract, and there was never really a great love of Major League Baseball by the corporate community in Seattle or the government.
Interesting. And so after that, where did you go from there, from like a sports perspective? I know that they tried to, Stern reached out to you for potentially turning around a basketball team.
We never really did any more in sports. We should have. We had a chance to take the Rockets over. We didn't. We bid on the Nationals in Washington. We're going to bid on the Dodgers. So we never did. It was sort of a circuitous path of why we didn't get back into sports. But my first love was always broadcasting. And as I told David Stern, when we sold the Mariners, Emmis had problems. And so I said, my job was really to fix Emmis. That was my job.
Yeah. And what do you think about the some of the current valuations? You see even in just a short time, a couple of years, with the NFL especially, you've got these it used to be 2 billion was a lot, and now every team's 5 billion and all that kind of stuff. Is that driven by sort of ever growing broadcast numbers? And do you think those will continue, or is it other things?
I talk about it in the book. There's three major reasons for it. One is we have more billionaires in this country than we used to have. So 30 years ago, you may have had 50 billionaires. Today, you've got 800 billionaires. And some of them have made so much money that they've been able to bid up these prices. There used to be a relationship between the cash flow or the potential cash flow and what a purchase price was. But when you see things like, the Clippers going for over $2 billion, a franchise that never made any money. Now you see the Broncos at 4.5. You'll probably see close to 6 for the Redskins. Now, make no mistake, the NFL is staggeringly profitable. And when you see that the average with every NFL team will make over $400 million in their new TV contract, you can see that with a salary cap of maybe 230 or 240, that before you sell a ticket or anything, these franchises are wildly valuable. And people who have the wherewithal don't mind spending the money to be in a business that's that profitable. And they bid it up like crazy.
And do you does the NFL do something different from a broadcasting perspective than the other leagues, or is it just a pace of eyeballs?
They have a lot more people watching. And they've really, the rest of sports is challenged by the cutting of the cord. I think you're starting to see that with the regional sports network struggling, where 3 or 4 years ago, a regional sports network may have had 1 million people. They were all paying $5 or $6 a month. Well, today they may be down to 700,000 people, and that ultimately will come in and hurt the ball clubs. It certainly hurt the regional sports networks. But the NFL has just been sort of the spiral. I mean, right now, before the Sunday ticket deal, I think the NFL is up to about $14 billion per team. $14 billion a year. That's a staggering amount of money. Staggering.
And is there anything some of these other leagues can do, or fledgling leagues can do from a broadcast perspective, that kind of in this new environment to get?
Well, I think they're all trying different things. But I think the thing is that the American public is sort of totally fascinated by the NFL. I mean, you see the NFL numbers, whether it's Monday night or Sunday night or during the day, Sunday or Thursday. They're off the charts. I think the top 30 programs in the United States on an annual basis are all National Football League games. So that's just a phenomenon far and away above anything else really in American life.
Yeah. So as you were going through the Mariners and after, what was some of the stuff that was happening in radio and TV? I know you mentioned that you eventually went into TV more.
Right.
What kind of happened around that time and after the Mariners?
Well, we went back after the Mariners. We had all sorts of things that happened toward the end of the Mariners, and we've said, as I say in the book, we just couldn't afford to lose $20 million a year owning a baseball team. The radio business struggled, so my job when getting out of baseball was fixing Emmis, my company, which is why I turned David Stern down. But I think, in terms of what we did all sorts of things. We fixed our balance sheet, as you always have to do when you run a business. Then we went public and we gobbled up more stations. When radio valuations got crazy after the Communications Act of 1996, that's when we said, gee, radio prices are too crazy. So we bought a lot of TV stations. And then we also went international radio. So we've done all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah. And do you think what's the next thing? Is it people purchasing, internet properties, or what?
Well, we're looking at all sorts of things. We've sort of divested of our core broadcasting properties now. We have one FM in New York left, but other than that, we've really divested. I think, listen, the biggest challenge is finding things that make money. Streaming is all the rage in video, but you saw the turmoil at the Disney company where they lost $1.5 billion with Disney Plus last quarter. So there's a lot of things that consumers like. The question is, can they make money? That's really the trick. We're looking at all sorts of things. We're having fun with all sorts of things. But I think the key is, for example, in regional sports networks, as you've seen, Curtis, people have cut the cord. And, I used to give an example. The best way I can describe the economics of sports is that I always use the example of an 85-year-old grandmother in Los Angeles who's had a bundled cable, and she's paying $10 a month for ESPN and $6 a month for the Dodgers and $5 a month for the Lakers and $4 a month for the Angels and $1 for the Pac-12 network, and she's paying $30 a month for sports, but she doesn't even know the Dodgers left Brooklyn. So the problem, and that is really the heart of sports, is that you had bundled cable and you had 100% of the population paying for what 30% care about. And as people break apart the bundle, either young people don't come in or old people, pass away or cut the cord. Those sports franchises that depended on 100% of the population paying for it now have to say, how do we rely on just the 30% that care? And that's why you see, the regional networks saying, okay, when the bundle is cut apart, we'll have to pay or try to get people to pay for like the Yes Network, or if you live here, Bally Sports to watch the Indiana Pacers, or Yes to watch the Yankees and Nets. And the question is, will they pay? That's the $64 question.
Yeah. Well, I'll make this the last question here. So you have a chapter in your book that's a no good deed goes unpunished, and that's like something my mom used to always tell me. What made you find that to be true?
Well, I had come up with the idea that the future of radio was going to be dependent on regaining portability. Like I said, I grew up in an era where the transistor radio changed radio listening forever, and every kid had a transistor radio. And then later, every kid had a Walkman, which was a stereo version of the transistor. And then kids had boom boxes. But, by the last 15 years, people stopped listening to radio that way. And my point was that every smartphone had an FM radio in it. And when I guess to give you here's the problem with streaming. If you got 2 minutes, I'll bore you with it.
Go for it.
We used to have a radio station in Los Angeles, Power 106. And the cost to distribute our signal was $60,000 a year, which is the cost of the electricity for my transmitter. So for $60,000 a year, I could send a signal into every home in Southern California. I could reach one person or all 15 million with no incremental cost. But if I took my transmitter down and streamed, then I had to pay a data charge to reach every listener, and they had to pay a data charge to get my signal. And in addition to that, I had music cost, performance royalties that I didn't have over the air. So the difference in reaching with my station in Los Angeles, Power 106, over the air cost me $60,000 a year. To reach the exact same listeners with the exact same content would cost me over $2 million a year through streaming. Well, that's why the economics of streaming are not very good. So you can, I'm holding up my smartphone, you listen to any music streaming here, but there was an actual radio that would avoid all those costs. So my job was to try to get the industry united to come together for that. And we have to read the chapters. A lot of crazy things happen.
Yeah. Well, I encourage everybody to read the book. It's coming out next week, I think you said.
Yeah, comes out next Tuesday.
Never ride a roller coaster upside down.
Yeah, I think if people read it, they'll find it. It's a lot of fun. If you like the economics of sports and broadcasting, and podcasting and streaming, the book takes you through all that. But mostly what it does is the stories, the crazy stories that happened to us along the way, and hopefully the lessons that you learn from them.
Yeah, you learn the most from the stories.
Right. Hopefully.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Curtis, my pleasure.